At 68, after being thrown out by her own children with just $1,200, a woman drove into the mountains and bought a piece of land no one wanted. What she discovered hidden beneath that forgotten ground didn't just change her life. It gave her the power to rebuild everything they took from her. Subscribe for more powerful stories and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Eleanor Whitmore was 68 the morning her children decided she no longer belonged in the life she had spent 4 decades building. The boardroom was too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest until breathing feels like work. She sat at the far end of a polished walnut table, her hands folded neatly over a worn leather portfolio, one she had carried through years no one ever bothered to remember. Outside, the city of Chicago stretched tall and proud, a skyline she had quietly helped shape. But inside that room, none of it belonged to her anymore. Her son, Daniel, didn't even look at her when he slid the envelope across the table. His watch gleamed under the cold overhead lights as if time itself had chosen his side. Beside him, her daughter Claire scrolled through renovation ideas for the very home Eleanor had paid for with her own inheritance decades ago. $1,200 a month, Daniel said flatly. That's more than enough. More than enough for a lifetime. Eleanor didn't cry, not then. She simply nodded once, slow and steady, as if accepting a fact written long before this moment. But deep inside her chest, something ancient and unbreakable shifted. Because what her children didn't understand was that they had just removed the only person who knew where the foundation of their entire world truly began. And sometimes, the strongest structures are built only after everything else collapses. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Eleanor didn't open it right away. She just stared at it, resting there on the table like something final, like a door that, once opened, would never close again. Across from her, Daniel leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping lightly against the armrest, impatient, almost bored. Claire didn't even pretend anymore. She was already talking about repainting the master bedroom in soft ivory tones, she said. Something modern. Something that erased everything that came before. Everything that included their mother. Go ahead, Daniel added, his voice calm, rehearsed. It's all been taken care of. Taken care of. Eleanor finally reached forward, her fingers steady, though colder than she expected, slid the envelope toward her. When she opened it, the sound of tearing paper echoed far louder than it should have in that quiet room. Inside was her entire life, reduced to numbers and legal language. A monthly allowance, $1,200, a formal notice 30 days to vacate the property, a clause any legal dispute would result in forfeiture of everything. Everything. Her home, gone, the company, never hers, not on paper, the decades, invisible. For a moment, her vision blurred not from tears, but from the sheer weight of realization. 40 years of early mornings, of quiet corrections, of blueprints redrawn at kitchen tables while the rest of the house slept. All of it erased with a signature she had never been allowed to write. I think this is fair, Claire said lightly, inspecting her nails. You don't need much anymore. You don't need much anymore. The words didn't hit like a slap. They settled deeper than that, like something sinking into bone. Eleanor folded the papers carefully, not crumpled, not shaken, just precise. The way she had always handled things no one else noticed needed fixing. I see, she said quietly. And she did. For the first time in years, she truly did. Because in that moment, something strange happened, not outside, but within her. The grief didn't explode. It didn't shatter her. It clarified her. Like fog lifting off a landscape she hadn't realized she'd been walking through blind. She saw Gerald, her late husband, not as the partner she had believed in, but as a man who had built his name on the quiet labor of someone he never intended to acknowledge. She saw Daniel not as her son, but as a reflection of a man who had taught him that power came from ownership, not creation. And Claire, not as her daughter, but as someone who had learned to measure worth in numbers, not sacrifice. And then, most importantly, she saw herself, not as they described her, but as she truly was, a builder, an architect. A woman who had spent 40 years holding up structures that others claimed as their own. And suddenly, the $1,200 didn't feel like an insult. It felt like a miscalculation, a dangerous one, because they believed they were sending her away with just enough to disappear quietly. What they didn't realize was that they had also freed her from signatures that were never hers, from names that overshadowed her own, from a life where her value had to be hidden to be accepted. Eleanor slowly stood. The chair slid back with a soft scrape against the floor, sharp enough to cut through the tension in the room. For the first time, Daniel looked up, really looked, and something in his expression flickered. Not guilt. Not yet. Something closer to uncertainty. Eleanor picked up her leather portfolio, her movements calm, deliberate. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate. At the door, she paused just for a second, not to look back at them, but to look at the room, at the walls she had once imagined, the structure she had once corrected, the foundation she had once understood better than anyone. And she realized something that made her chest tighten, not with pain, but with a quiet, rising strength. They didn't know how any of it truly worked. Not the company, not the buildings, not the legacy they believed they had inherited. They were standing inside something they didn't understand, trying to control forces they had never learned to build. Eleanor opened the door. The hallway beyond felt colder, emptier, but also honest. Each step she took echoed softly, like the beginning of something new, something uncertain. Yes, but finally hers. In her coat pocket. Her fingers brushed against a small folded newspaper clipping she had picked up weeks earlier, without much thought. A tax auction. A forgotten piece of land, somewhere far north. Worthless, according to everyone else. $5. She hadn't known why she kept it. Until now. As she stepped outside, the wind caught her silver hair, carrying with it the distant scent of rain and possibility. They thought they had reduced her life to a monthly allowance, but what they had really done was remove every limit she had ever been forced to live within. And somewhere far from the city, a mountain was waiting. The drive north felt longer than it should have, not because of the distance, but because of what she was leaving behind. Eleanor kept both hands steady on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the narrow ribbon of road stretching into the distance. The city had disappeared hours ago, its noise, its glass towers, its cold indifference. In its place, there was silence. Real silence. The kind that doesn't judge you, the kind that doesn't ask who you used to be. By the time she reached the land, the sun was already sinking low behind the mountains. It wasn't much to look at. Just as the notice had promised. Jagged rock, uneven ground, wild brush tangled like it had been left untouched for decades. And at the edge of it all, a small, rusted shed leaning slightly to one side, as if even it had given up trying to stand straight. Eleanor stepped out of the car slowly. The air hit her first sharp, cold, carrying the scent of pine and something deeper, something ancient. It filled her lungs in a way that felt almost overwhelming. For a brief moment, she hesitated. Not because she was afraid, but because the truth finally settled in. There would be no one here to help her, no warm lights waiting, no second chances if she failed. Just her. At 68, standing on land no one else wanted. She let out a quiet breath, watching it fade into the cold air. Well, she whispered to herself, almost gently, let's see what you're made of. The first night was the hardest. The shed barely kept out the wind. Every gust rattled the thin metal roof, sending sharp echoes into the darkness. The ground beneath her was cold, uneven, unforgiving. Eleanor wrapped herself in a blanket, her body curled tightly against the chill. Sleep didn't come easily. Memories did. The boardroom, Daniel's voice, Claire's indifference, the sound of paper tearing. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down on her chest so heavily she thought she might break. Tears slipped quietly down her temples, disappearing into the rough fabric beneath her head. Not loud, not dramatic. Just honest. I gave you everything, she murmured into the dark. The wind howled in response, low and endless, as if the mountain itself was listening. And then, something shifted. Not outside. inside. Because as the tears slowed, something else began to rise. Not anger, not revenge. Something quieter, something steadier. Resolve. Morning came slowly. A thin beam of sunlight slipped through a crack in the roof, landing gently across her face. Eleanor opened her eyes, her body stiff, her hands aching, but her mind clear. She stepped outside. The world looked different in the daylight. Still harsh, still wild, but no longer empty. She walked slowly across the uneven ground, her boots crunching softly against gravel and frost. Her eyes moved carefully, observing, measuring, understanding. It wasn't just land. It was structure. Natural lines, hidden layers, a foundation waiting to be read, not forced. Then she saw it. At first, it was just a glimmer, a faint shimmer of light reflecting off something embedded in the rock face. She stepped closer, and that's when the world quietly changed. Running along the jagged surface of the mountain was a thin vein of crystal quartz, catching the sunlight in fractured patterns. It wasn't random. It followed a line, a perfect, deliberate line. Eleanor's breath slowed. Her fingers reached out, brushing lightly against the stone. It was cold, but beneath that cold, there was something else. A pattern, a logic. Her mind, sharp, trained, awakened after years of silence, began to move. If the quartz ran this way, then the pressure beneath the formation. Her heart began to beat faster. Water, she whispered. Not surface water. Not rain runoff. Something deeper. Something constant. She moved along the rock face, following the line with growing intensity. Her boots slipped slightly on loose gravel, but she didn't stop. And then she heard it. Faint at first. So faint she thought she imagined it. A soft, steady sound. Like a heartbeat beneath stone. She dropped to her knees, brushing away dirt and loose debris with trembling hands. The sound grew clearer. A trickle. No, more than that. A flow. Her breath caught because she knew. Water like this didn't just exist by accident. It meant pressure. It meant depth. It meant value. Real value. The kind people built entire fortunes around. Eleanor sat back slowly, her hands resting against the cold earth as the realization settled over her. This land, this forgotten, unwanted piece of rock, wasn't empty. It had been waiting for someone who knew how to see. A small, quiet laugh escaped her lips, not loud, not triumphant, just disbelieving. They thought this was nothing, she murmured. The wind moved softly through the trees, almost like a reply. For the first time since she had been forced out of her home, Eleanor felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Not the fragile kind. Not the kind that depends on others. But something solid. Something rooted. She looked out across the land again, really looked this time, and she didn't see abandonment anymore. She saw potential. She saw structure. She saw the beginning of something no one else had the vision to build. And somewhere, far behind her, in a city made of glass and borrowed ideas, her children were still living inside a world they didn't understand. While here, on a mountain they had dismissed as worthless. Eleanor Whitmore had just discovered the first piece of a future they could never take from her. That night, the mountain felt different. Not warmer, not softer, but different. Eleanor sat just outside the shed, wrapped in her coat, watching the last light of the sun disappear behind the jagged ridges. The sky shifted slowly from pale gold to deep violet, and for the first time in years, there was no noise demanding her attention. No voices telling her who she was, no expectations pressing against her chest. Just the quiet and the steady, almost imperceptible sound of water moving beneath the earth. She closed her eyes and listened. For 40 years, she had lived her life reacting, fixing mistakes that weren't hers, supporting dreams that didn't include her, making herself smaller so someone else could appear bigger. She had called it love. She had called it sacrifice. But sitting there, on a cold piece of land no one wanted, she began to see it for what it truly was. Disappearance. Not all at once. Not violently. but slowly, quietly, piece by piece, until one day there was almost nothing left of her that the world could recognize. Eleanor opened her eyes. The mountain didn't care about any of that. It didn't know her as someone's wife, or someone's mother, or someone who had been given $1,200 a month. It simply was, and for the first time in decades, so was she. The next morning, she didn't rush. There was no schedule to keep, no one waiting for breakfast, no meetings, no expectations, just the land. She walked it slowly, step by step, as if learning a new language. Her boots pressed into the earth, her eyes tracing the natural lines of the terrain. She began to notice things she would have overlooked before. The way the slope curved, not randomly, but with intention. The way certain areas held moisture longer than others. The way the wind moved differently depending on where she stood. This wasn't chaos. It was design. Not human design. Something older. Something honest. She knelt again by the rock face where she had heard the water. This time, she didn't just observe it. She studied it. Her fingers followed the path of the quartz vein, her mind mapping possibilities without even trying. If the water source was stable, if the pressure held through winter, if the ground beneath could support, she stopped. Not because she didn't know what came next, but because she realized something that made her chest tighten in a completely different way. She wasn't thinking like someone starting over. She was thinking like someone who had never lost her place. All those years. All those nights at the kitchen table, all those silent corrections, all that knowledge she had buried just to survive. It was still there, untouched. Waiting. Eleanor sat back slowly, her breath steady. "They didn't take anything from me," she whispered. The realization didn't come with anger. It came with clarity. Her children hadn't stripped her of her life. They had stripped her of the illusion that her life belonged to them. That shift changed everything. The fear that had followed her up the mountain, the quiet, persistent fear of failure, of being too old, too late. It began to loosen its grip, not disappear completely, but weaken, because she wasn't starting from nothing. She was starting from experience, from knowledge earned the hard way, from decades of seeing what worked and what didn't. The world had told her she was at the end, but the mountain didn't believe in endings, only foundations. By midday, her movements had changed. There was more purpose in them now, more certainty. She cleared a small section of brush not randomly, but strategically, creating space, defining boundaries. Her arms ached, her back protested, but she didn't stop. Because for the first time, the work wasn't for someone else. It was for her. Every branch she moved, every stone she shifted, it all felt different. Heavier, but also lighter. Because it meant something. As the sun began to lower again, Eleanor stood at the center of the small clearing she had made. It wasn't much, just a rough circle carved out of wild growth. But to her, it was a beginning, a foundation. She turned slowly, taking in the view the mountain, the trees, the quiet stretch of land that no one had wanted. And she smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, just real, because she finally understood something that had taken her nearly 70 years to learn. Your value is not decided by the people who fail to see it. And your life does not end when someone else stops believing in you. Sometimes. That's exactly when it begins. That night, as she lay in the shed once more, the cold still pressing in from every side, it didn't feel like a place of survival anymore. It felt like a place of becoming. And somewhere beneath her, the mountain kept its steady rhythm, waiting, not to test her, but to reveal what she had been all along. The discovery of the water changed something fundamental, not just in the land, but in Eleanor. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm, one that felt almost sacred. She woke with the light, worked until her hands ached, rested only when her body refused to go further. There were no clocks here, only the sun and her will to keep moving. But now, every step she took had direction. She returned to the rock face again and again, not with excitement, but with focus, careful, methodical, patient. The way she used to approach a flawed design, knowing that if she looked long enough, the truth would reveal itself. Using a small hand shovel she had found in the shed, Eleanor began clearing the narrow opening where the sound of water was strongest. The earth was cold, stubborn, but she didn't fight it. She worked with it, slowly, respectfully, as if the mountain was something to be understood, not conquered. And then on the fourth morning it happened. Her shovel struck something that didn't sound like dirt. A hollow, metallic echo. She froze. The sound lingered in the air, sharp and unmistakable. Eleanor knelt down, brushing away soil with her hands, her breath shallow, now not from fear, but from anticipation. There it was, a small, weathered surface, hidden beneath layers of earth and time. Wood, old, reinforced with rusted iron, a door, barely 2 feet across, built directly into the stone. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't speak. She just stared at it, her mind trying to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. Because this wasn't natural. This wasn't random. Someone had been here before. Her fingers trembled slightly as she cleared the remaining dirt, revealing the edges of the door. The hinges were corroded, the wood cracked with age. But it had been sealed, protected, hidden. For how long, she couldn't tell. Eleanor reached for the small crowbar she had brought from the shed. She hesitated, not out of fear, but out of respect, as if she were about to open something that had been waiting, specifically for her. Then, slowly, she applied pressure. The wood groaned, the metal creaked, and with a sharp breaking snap, the seal gave way. The darkness inside was thick, untouched. For a moment, she could smell it. Old air, metal, time itself. Eleanor leaned closer, her hand reaching carefully into the hollow space. Her fingers brushed against something cold, solid. She pulled it out, and her breath caught a cylinder made of copper, aged to a deep green, its surface rough with oxidation, but intact, perfectly intact. It was heavier than it looked, and sealed, tightly, carefully, deliberately. She sat back slowly, the cylinder resting in her lap, her heart now beating with a quiet intensity that filled the silence around her. This was not chance. It took her nearly 10 minutes to open it, not because it was difficult, but because she was careful, gentle, as if whatever was inside deserved to be revealed, not forced. When the lid finally loosened, a faint release of pressure escaped, followed by a scent so distinct it made her pause. Old paper. Preserved. Waiting. Eleanor carefully slid the contents out, wrapped in oilcloth, protected. And when she unfolded it, the world shifted. Again. It was a map, hand-drawn, precise, beautiful. Every line deliberate, every marking intentional. Her eyes moved across it quickly at first, then slower, then with growing intensity, because she understood what she was looking at, not vaguely, not partially, completely. Her breath grew uneven. "This isn't just land," she whispered. It was a system, an underground network, water channels mapped in exact detail, pressure points, flow directions, and at the center of it all, her land, not just sitting on water, controlling it. Her fingers trembled as she traced the lines. In her mind, calculations began forming instantly. Water like this, steady, natural, untouched. It wasn't just valuable. It was rare, extremely rare. The kind of resource developers fought over, the kind that turned forgotten land into power, real power. And then she saw the second layer. The markings beneath the surface notes, geological indicators, stone density, composition. Her eyes widened. Granite? Not just any granite, a specific type. Dense, durable, unique. The kind used in high-end architectural builds. The kind that wasn't easy to find anymore. Eleanor leaned back slowly, the map still in her hands. And for the first time, a small, quiet smile touched her lips. Not from revenge, not from pride, but from understanding, Clear, undeniable understanding. They had given her $1,200 a month, thinking she would fade away. But here she was, sitting on land worth more than everything they had taken from her. Combined. She looked out across the mountain, the same land they had dismissed, the same place they believed would bury her. And she saw it clearly now. Not as survival, not as escape, but as opportunity. A beginning, far greater than anything she had left behind. They didn't send me here to disappear, she said softly. They sent me here to rise. The wind moved gently through the trees, and beneath her, the mountain answered. The first time Eleanor stood at the edge of the clearing and looked out over the valley, she didn't see what others would have seen. She didn't see isolation. She didn't see difficulty. She saw structure. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, almost quietly, the woman who had once lived in the shadows of other people's decisions began to disappear. Not in the way she had before. This time she was shedding, layer by layer. The obedient wife, the invisible partner, the mother who didn't need much. All of it falling away with every swing of her hands, every line she sketched, every decision she made without asking permission. Her mornings began earlier now, before the sun even touched the peaks. Wrapped in a heavy coat, Eleanor would step outside with a notebook in hand, her breath visible in the cold air as she studied the land like an old friend finally speaking honestly. She mapped everything. The slope of the terrain, the direction of the wind, the rhythm of the water beneath the rock. Her pencil moved quickly across the page, not hesitating, not doubting. Because this time, no one was there to question her. And more importantly, she no longer questioned herself. The work was brutal. There was no pretending otherwise. Her hands blistered, her back burned, her muscles unused to this kind of labor protested with every movement. More than once, she had to stop, leaning against the cold stone just to catch her breath. At 68, her body reminded her of her age. But her mind felt sharper than it had in decades. Alive, hungry, unstoppable. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was creation. With the help of salvaged wood from nearby abandoned structures and tools, she slowly gathered from the nearest town miles away. Eleanor began building something small. Not a house. Not yet. A foundation. A single, carefully chosen spot carved into the natural curve of the mountain. Protected from wind, exposed to light. Perfect. She worked slowly. Not because she had to, but because she understood something most people didn't. Rushing breaks things, and she had spent 40 years fixing what others rushed through. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Every beam she placed was intentional, every measurement exact, every decision hers. And with each passing day, something inside her grew stronger. Not louder, not more aggressive, just steady, like the mountain beneath her feet. There were moments, quiet ones, when she would stop and look at her hands. Rough now, marked with small cuts, dirt beneath her nails. Hands that had once only held pens, now shaping something real. And instead of feeling loss, she felt pride. A deep, grounded pride that didn't need recognition. Because for the first time, she could see what she had built, and no one could take credit for it. The first structure took nearly a month. It was small, simple, but strong. Built partially into the rock itself, using the mountain as support rather than fighting against it. When she stepped back and looked at it for the first time, she didn't smile right away. She just stood there, silent, taking it in. Because it wasn't just a structure, it was proof. Proof that she had never lost her ability, only her permission to use it. Word began to travel, slowly at first. A woman in town mentioned the older lady on the mountain. A man passing through stopped to ask if she needed help and left shaking his head in quiet respect instead. Then came Samuel Reed, a quiet man, weathered, observant, the kind of person who didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. He arrived one afternoon in an old pickup truck, stepping out slowly as his eyes scanned the structure Eleanor had built. He didn't compliment it immediately. Didn't question her either. He just walked around it once, twice, running his hand along the wood, the stone, the lines. Then he looked at her. "You built this alone?" he asked. Eleanor nodded. He paused, then gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Not many people know how to build with the land," he said. "They usually try to fight it." Eleanor's eyes softened slightly. "I've spent most of my life fixing things that were built wrong," she replied. Samuel let out a quiet breath, almost like he understood more than she had said. "I've got a mill," he added after a moment. "Good wood. Been sitting unused for years." A pause. "If you've got more plans like this—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. That was the moment everything shifted again. Not dramatically, not loudly, but in a way that mattered. Because for the first time since she had arrived on the mountain, someone saw her, not as a woman who had been left behind, but as someone building something worth standing beside. That night, Eleanor sat outside her small structure, the cool air wrapping around her as she looked out over the land. She thought about the boardroom, the envelope, the $1,200, and for a brief moment, she almost smiled. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it no longer defined her. She wasn't the woman they had dismissed. She wasn't the life they had erased. She was something else now, something stronger, something they would never understand. She was no longer surviving the end of her life. She was building the beginning of something they would never be able to take from her. 6 months later, the mountain no longer looked the same, and neither did Eleanor. Where there had once been silence and broken ground, there was now life. Not loud, not overwhelming, but intentional. 3 structures stood along the curve of the mountainside, each one carefully placed, as if they had always belonged there. Built from stone, drawn directly from the land, and wood shaped by steady, patient hands. They didn't dominate the mountain. They blended into it, as if the earth itself had agreed to let them exist. Eleanor stood on the edge of the main deck, her hands resting lightly against the smooth wooden railing. The morning air carried the scent of pine and fresh earth. Below her, the valley stretched endlessly quiet, vast, untouched. For a moment, she closed her eyes, not to escape, but to feel it, the wind, the stillness, the undeniable truth of where she was. She wasn't the woman who had been handed an envelope anymore. She wasn't the one who had walked out of a boardroom with nothing but silence behind her. She was the woman who had taken $5 and built something no one else could see. The first visitors had arrived 2 weeks earlier. At first, just one couple. Curious, hesitant, they had heard whispers in town about a place on the mountain, about a woman who had built something unusual, something different. They stayed one night, then 2, then they told someone else. And slowly, without advertisement, without noise, the world began to notice. By the time the 3rd cabin was finished, there was a waiting list. Not because it was luxurious, but because it was real. People didn't come for comfort. They came for something they couldn't quite explain. A feeling. A quiet, a sense that, for the first time in a long time, they could breathe. Eleanor never called it a business. To her, it was something else. A space, a place where nothing needed to be proven. Because she knew what it felt like to spend a lifetime proving your worth to people who had already decided not to see it. Samuel stood beside her now, leaning casually against the railing, his gaze fixed on the distant tree line. "You've got people driving up here from 3 states away," he said quietly. Eleanor smiled faintly. "I didn't build it for them," she replied. Samuel nodded. "I know." A pause. But they needed it anyway. The sound of tires on gravel broke the silence. A vehicle? Slow, careful, unfamiliar. Eleanor didn't turn right away. She already knew. Some things you can feel before you see them. When she finally looked, the black SUV stood out against the natural landscape like something that didn't belong. Too polished, too clean, too certain of itself. Daniel stepped out first. Then Claire. They looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence, as if the mountain had quietly reminded them of their place in something much bigger than themselves. They walked toward her slowly, not with the confidence they once carried, Not with arrogance, but with something unfamiliar. Uncertainty? Daniel spoke first. We didn't realize, he began, his voice tighter than usual, then stopped. Because for once, he didn't have the right words. Claire looked around, her eyes taking in the structures, the land, the quiet power of everything Eleanor had created. It's incredible, she said softly, not as a compliment. But as a realization, Eleanor didn't move toward them, didn't greet them, didn't invite them in. She simply stood where she was, calm, steady, unshaken. You came for the land, she said gently. Not a question, a truth. Daniel swallowed. We need access to the stone, he admitted, and the water. There it was, not an apology, not regret. Need. Eleanor nodded slowly, as if she had already expected it, because she had, long before they arrived, long before they understood what they had lost. I know, she said. Her voice wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. It was something far more powerful, certain. She reached into her pocket and unfolded a single sheet of paper. Not rushed, not dramatic, just precise. The rights belong to me, she continued, all of it. Daniel's face shifted. For the first time, real understanding, real consequence. You built your future on something you didn't understand, Eleanor said quietly. And now you're asking the person you erased to save it. Silence fell between them. Heavy, honest. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it again. Because there was nothing left to argue, no angle left to take, no control left to hold. Eleanor looked at them both, not with anger, but with clarity, a kind of calm that only comes after everything has already been lost and rebuilt. I gave you everything once, she said softly, and you called it nothing. A pause. The wind moved gently across the deck. I won't make that mistake again. She stepped back, not away from them, but into herself, into everything she had built, everything she had become. The mountain stood behind her, solid, unshakable, a reflection of the woman she had always been, but was never allowed to show. Daniel lowered his eyes. Claire said nothing, and for the first time in their lives, they understood, too late. As their car disappeared down the winding road, Eleanor remained where she was, watching, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, but with peace. Because this was never about revenge. It was about truth. And the truth was simple. They thought they had sent her away to disappear. But instead, they had sent her to the only place in the world where she could finally rise. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find what was truly yours. Eleanor didn't become strong at 68. She finally stopped giving her strength to people who didn't value it. Your worth doesn't disappear because others ignore it. It waits until you place it in the right environment. It's never too late to rebuild. If you feel overlooked or left behind, don't start over, start differently. Use what you already know, trust your experience, and stop asking for permission to matter. Because the moment you choose yourself, everything begins to change. If this message truly resonates with you, take a moment and comment foundation below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need this reminder today.